My cousin Caleb discovered 6 months ago that he and his wife are pregnant with their first child. And just like that, as many of you know, his life entirely changed. This man whom I've known since he was born to be stubborn and impulsive, irresponsible and rash over the years, but in particular now, has a radically different disposition. All of a sudden, he cares about our country, the condition of our education system, the mental health of his community. He goes to mass, he tempers his eating and his drinking. He tends to his wife, he works on being a better husband, and he strives to provide the conditions and resources his family needs to thrive. And shockingly, in all of this, he has joy. Because 20 years ago, his life, as I've described it today, would have sounded to him like slavery. But now this new young father finds in it freedom and a fullness as it draws him out of himself into sacrificial love and virtue. Now, as a priest for me, it's hard not to see this spiritual springtime in his life as a taste of what the constant experience of life in the garden was like, where Adam and Eve enjoyed God's blessings and they rejoiced in those blessings. Blessings like living in right relationship with God rather than a fragmented conscience. Like the freedom that comes from virtuous sovereignty over creation rather than enslavement to it. The joy of membership in the divine family as his son and daughter, and then cooperating in the human family, which they got to build. And the fullness that came from the abundance of God who cared for all of their needs and was attentive to them at every moment. So for Adam and Eve, all of this led to what the Jews would call shalom, which is a state of perfect peace with God and creation, and brought about in them a sense of wholeness, integrity, a kind of everything is as it should be feeling. But as you know, those days are long gone, as is our shalom. And Hannah's story that we heard in the first reading is one aspect of that. Because the first reading builds on the long and agonizing story of Hannah's infertility. So this blessing of family has been denied her. And she desperately, more than anything, longs to have a child. But for many painful years, she couldn't. And so we hear today how she goes to the temple with tears to ask the Lord's blessing. And he gave it. God opens her womb and she bears him a son, and she names that son Samuel, who goes on to be this incredible prophet in the Old Testament. But for Hannah and her part, her joy is in this way totally full, just as Caleb's is right now, because each of them were tasting one aspect of a much larger shalom. But the miracle of salvation history is that God has promised to restore this shalom to us. And one of the ways that he anticipated this for his people was to institute what became known as the Jubilee laws. Now, a lot can be said about Jubilee, and I'm not going to get into all of that now. But God enshrined this Jubilee into Jewish law that was meant to be for them a time of mercy and blessing. It was a year of abundance, Sabbath rest, and freedom from debts. It was a time for families, so if they had traveled, they all came home. A time for worship and reconnection with God, with each other, and of course, creation itself. It was, in effect, meant to be a restoration of God's original blessings from the garden. And so, and you can see this in Leviticus 25, God demanded this Jubilee from the Jews after every 7 sets of 7 years. So that's 49 years, meaning that the 50th year was the year of Jubilee. And all of this was itself an anticipation of the day when God would definitively reconstitute Jubilee for his people permanently. And my point to you today is that Jesus' birth institutes that time of Jubilee. And today, we celebrate its first fruits, which is the family. Now, beginning with Adam and Eve, as you know, the devil has gone after the human family vigorously. Already in the garden, we see as a result of his efforts, fomented tensions between husband and wife who now are blaming each other for one another's guilt. There's pain and strife that's introduced into their vocations, as well as inequality between them. Shortly outside of the garden, all of this becomes polygamy, adultery, abuse, and so the whole family dynamic just spirals. In modern times, we've so redefined the family that it's become unrecognizable from God's plan. Fertility is treated as the enemy by things like contraception, abortion, or the way we even speak about avoiding a pregnancy as health care, like as a good thing. The strength of the marital bond is undermined by shortcuts to divorce and a culture of infidelity, which the internet puts in the palm of every one of our hands. And forceful ideologies push us to disown our families if they disagree with our politics or our lifestyles, as our recent holiday celebrations and the social media posts around them demonstrate. There's this observable anger and resentment that society not only promotes but justifies, and it blinds us to the indispensable good of family, which we've come to now view as a hindrance to our freedom, such that somehow we've legitimized discarding it for any reason at all. And you don't need me to tell you that the result of this has been a lot of pain, and it has robbed us of shalom. Now, providentially, this weekend begins a year of Jubilee in the church, and I encourage everyone to spend this year deep diving into God's plan and his promises for Jubilee. To assist you in understanding all that means, I recommend to you a short book. It's called Jesus and the Jubilee by Dr. John Bergsma. It was actually given to me by one of you, and I am currently reading it, and it's excellent. But today, the Feast of the Holy Family, we're celebrating the dawning of God's Jubilee in the family. It is, in fact, a Christmas mystery. So how can we live that Jubilee in the context of our own families? Well, a few suggestions would be to dedicate time to spend with your family, to visit relatives maybe you haven't seen in a while because you've just been too busy, to put down the technology which alienates us from each other and to find ways to be present to one another. Maybe it's game night. To work on letting go of resentments and to be intentional about offering forgiveness. To find ways to help members of your family grow or heal, and to be mindful of those relatives who could really use your help. But in all things, and most importantly, to bring one another to God, who is our shalom. Now you'll notice that all of these things are present in the Holy Family. When Mary spent time with Elizabeth, supporting her in her need, celebrating life's events with her and staying connected. When Joseph let go of whatever plans he may have had for his life and his marriage and made room for the pregnant Mary in his heart and supported his family during very difficult times unto incredible sacrifice of his own. But above all, how all of them as a family did everything for the glory of God, always spurring each other on to the pleasure of the Father. This, my friends, was the secret to their shalom, even in incredible danger and insecurity. And the point that I'm bringing home to you now, as Jesus ushers in this new era of Jubilee, is that he intends to bring that shalom to your home as well.